Today I'm going to tell you about 12 things that I did when I was studying Japanese to become conversationally fluent in about 6 months. I'm also going to cover 3 things I wish I didn't do when I started learning Japanese because I want you to avoid those mistakes as well. So I have to say this. Stick around to the end if you want to learn more about those. Or you can just click the timestamp. I came to Japan back in 2012 with no intention of staying here for very long. I planned on staying here for about a year, making some money and moving along. But I fell in love with the country, and when I fell in love with it, I realized that I was probably going to want to be here for a little bit longer. A little bit longer ended up being 8 years. But anyway, when I realized that I wanted to be here for quite a bit longer, I decided that I should probably learn some Japanese, because what a waste it would be to live here for, 2 or more years and come out not actually speaking anything. I wanted to make some friends that weren't native English speakers. On top of that, it was kind of a pain in the neck to have my manager have to come and help me every time I wanted to, for example, open a bank account or send something in the mail or get internet. I wanted to be able to take care of all that stuff on my own, so I figured, I should probably learn some Japanese. So let's just jump right into it. The first thing that I did when I started learning Japanese is I learned hiragana immediately. Japanese and English have quite different pronunciation and phonetics, so I knew that to get things down I needed to learn how to pronounce Japanese properly as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, I never heard about pitch accent until years after I started studying Japanese, but I did know that the pronunciation itself, having equal length moras and sort of rolling the R's on rariru and stuff like that. So I wanted to get that stuff down because I wanted to sound as close to natural as possible. If I'd known about pitch accent at the time, I probably would have spent a lot more time on it, but what can you do? That's something I'll have to work on more in the future. But anyway, I learned hiragana first. That's the first thing I did, and that's the first thing you should do. You should learn hiragana immediately. To do that, I used James Haysig's Remembering the Kana. I found his book to be really, really good for learning hiragana. It was not so great for learning katakana, but there's lots more resources now. Another great resource that I found a lot of people find useful nowadays is the Tofugu Guide to Learning Hiragana. I'll put a link to all of the things I talk about down in the description today, so if you want to check any of them out, go ahead and check out down there. The next thing I did, number 2, was learn a couple phrases from a phrase book. I've always recommended this to people who are starting out because I've always suggested that people should start speaking immediately from day one. Some prominent figures in the Japanese learning community would probably disagree with me there, and for understandable reasons, but see, I needed to start speaking to people immediately. I was already in Japan, and I was sort of lonely, and I wanted to make friends immediately, so I didn't have time to spend 1 or 2 years immersing in the language before I started speaking to people. So I wanted to be able to speak immediately. So I got a phrase book, I learned a couple of the phrases in there, and I brought it with me everywhere I went, so that if I was out eating or something and someone came up and talked to me, which happens more often than you'd expect, I'd be able to talk to them, at least a little bit. The phrasebook was really useful because sometimes when I didn't know how to say stuff, they would pull the phrasebook from me and look for it in the book and be like, oh, this is what I want to say. And then I'd be able to read what the English was and come up with a response. Maybe the response would be right there. So that was quite useful. I still do recommend learning some good, easy set phrases from a phrasebook in the beginning, so that you have something to start with, especially if you do want to go the speak from day one route. And speaking of speak from day one, what I did next was I immediately started looking for natives to speak with. I had already luckily made a few Japanese friends. Now, they were learning English as well, so their English was much better than my Japanese. But I wanted to speak so badly that I sort of forced myself to speak Japanese in front of them. And at first they would laugh and think it was silly or cute or whatever, but over time, as my Japanese improved, they would speak Japanese with me more and more. Now, not everyone learning Japanese lives in Japan. Fortunately, there's lots of resources that can help you there. I tried a few different resources, but what I ended up settling on was italki. I think it's italki. I used to call it italki, but apparently that's not what it's called nowadays, so whatever. On there, you can find conversational partners for free, or there's also professional and community tutors who you can pay a fee to take 30 to 60-minute lessons with. I started taking lessons almost immediately on Skype using italki, and they were fairly affordable, so I was taking between 1 and 5 lessons per week. The times I was doing 5, I'll get to that in a minute, because that was a really important time in my journey. But having natives to speak with right from the beginning was really nice. The next thing I did was I quit English. Now, it's a little scary to quit English when you have barely any grasp of the language yet, but it also forces you to sort of cut down to what's important in conversation. If you're trying to say something to someone in the language you're studying, and it's really, really difficult, you suddenly realize that maybe what you want to say isn't so important. But then some other times you realize you really, 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 really want to express what you're trying to say. So you go out of your way to try and figure it out. And those are the things that really stick with you. And it also points out, weak points in your Japanese, especially if you're a little further into your studies, forcing yourself to not use English, it points out your weak points. And that helps you find what you need to study next. So I stopped using English almost immediately by doing days where I would quit using English. Now, I lived in Japan, so that was a little bit easier. I had friends who spoke Japanese, so I would hang out with them those days and I would force myself to speak Japanese. And the first couple times I was very quiet. But as time went on, I started doing 2 days with no English and 3 days with no English. And 2 months after I started studying Japanese, or maybe it was 3, I can't remember, I decided to take a month off of English. So I took the entire month of March, I believe 2013, off from English. And when I say that, I mean speaking even with people who didn't speak Japanese in only English. I imagine it annoyed them some, but for some people it seemed to inspire them to start studying Japanese a little bit harder as well. So what I did that month is I changed all of my devices to Japanese. I stopped watching all other content in English, so I didn't watch TV, Netflix, anything in English. I stopped listening to music in English. I would only listen to Japanese music. And because I was working a full-time job, I still didn't really have enough time in my mind to speak Japanese. So I also did daily lessons on italki. So those daily hour lessons really, really pushed me forward. And by the end of that month, I felt like I was able to hold fairly fluid conversations with just about anyone on many, many different topics. The next really important thing I did was I found ways of studying that I actually enjoyed. Pushing yourself to study things that you don't enjoy, it never really works out. It's really hard to build habits around things you don't enjoy. Like, you can grind through certain things for a while, but a day's gonna come when you just don't feel like it, and you'll probably never go back to it. So I found different ways of studying that I found really enjoyable. For example, I would wake up and I'd study 20 new kanji and Remembering the Kanji by James Hasig, and then I'd do a vocabulary deck for a little while. I really enjoyed Anki at the time. Next, I would read some NHK News Web Easy or a blog or something, and then maybe I'd watch a little bit of anime. But basically, I kept mixing it up until I found things that I could enjoy doing repeatedly. And then I did those things repeatedly every day, ideally at the same time. And before I knew it, I felt guilty if I didn't do those things. I made sure to take at least 1 day off every week, but 6 days a week, I was doing those things at the same time every day, whether it was reviewing my kanji, reviewing vocabulary, learning new grammar, whatever it was, I did it every day. And doing it every day, that's the most important thing. But to do it every day, you need to be enjoying yourself. So speaking of things I enjoyed, it was really important to find some good resources, because otherwise, you've got nothing. So the things I used the most were Remembering the Kanji by James Hasig. Now, there are better things out there nowadays, maybe. I know a lot of people like Wani Kani, which I haven't really gotten a chance to mess around with yet. I hope to in the future. But Remembering the Kanji, I don't know, the way that he taught the kanji, and I know it's just recognition, you don't learn the readings or anything, I found it really useful. And it helped me when I was learning new vocabulary because I already knew what the general meaning of each kanji in the new vocabulary was, so that made it stick a lot quicker. At least I felt that way. I also used Tai Kim's grammar guide. I have a review that I did of that right over here. Nowadays, I'm not so sure. I think Tai Kim did a great job, and I like the way that he organized his content. But there are sometimes mistakes that I feel are kind of glaring now looking at them, that I'm not so sure are forgivable or not. I don't know. A lot of the content, most of the content is really great. But, just be careful and ask questions if you're not sure. Finally, Anki. There are other SRS programs out there like Memorize, and there's other ones, but I always keep coming back to Anki because it's so powerful, so customizable. There's add-ons that make life so much easier. It's amazing, and it's enjoyable to use, and the way that you can sync between computer and your cell phone, it's just, I love it. I'm a huge Anki fan. I highly recommend it, and I'll be putting out more tutorials on it in the future. So keep an eye out for those. The next thing that was really important was reading. So I started reading as soon as I possibly could. And luckily, nowadays there's a lot more resources out there for you. When I started studying Japanese, there was very few graded readers. There's still very few graded readers, but there was very few free content available online for reading Japanese, at least at like a beginner level. But what I used a lot was NHK Newsweb Easy, and what I did most was I would search for blogs on content I was interested in. So at the time it was mountain climbing. So I would search something like blog yamanobori or blog tozan. And that would bring up blogs of people that were into mountain climbing like I was at the time. So I would read those and I would use Yomi-chan is I think what I was using. I think Yomi-chan was around back there. But basically you could just highlight a word on the page and it would show you the meaning. Depending on what dictionaries you had installed, it could be Japanese to Japanese or Japanese to English, whatever it was. Yomi-chan is amazing. I'm going to do a tutorial on that soon. But if it's already done, there will be a link over here. Now, speaking of looking up blogs that you're interested in and reading them for content, the next thing I did was I learned vocabulary about things I was interested in. Now, a lot of that vocabulary I did take from those blogs, so I learned a lot about mountain climbing. I just started mountain climbing after I arrived in Japan, so there was a point in time where I knew more about mountain climbing in Japanese than I did in English. So it's really cool if you can find like a new hobby when you start studying Japanese so that you can learn it in Japanese, because then that'll be something you can actually only speak about knowledgeably in Japanese. So that was really, really useful for me. I also went out of my way to look up other vocabulary about mountain climbing and about the things I was interested in because I wanted to be able to talk about it with other people who are interested in it. So I think it's way, way, way more useful to learn vocabulary that you really like, that you're really into, about things that you want to talk about, than it is to just pick up a list from a textbook and learn them all out by rote. A lot of times those vocabulary words are important as well, but especially in the beginning, I feel like it's good to knock out some vocabulary that you're actually interested in because it'll keep you going. Another thing I did right from the start is I learned a bunch of interjections and conjunctions, like right from the beginning. I wanted to sound as natural as possible. Little responses, various ways of responding to the same question. I also learned conjunctions like kara, node, soshite, demo, and ga, and just as many as I could fast, because the more conjunctions you have, the more complicated sentences you can make, and the more complicated sentences you can understand. So it makes it easier to have a conversation. So get those out of the way fast. A lot of textbooks don't teach them fast enough. So I strongly suggest picking up as many conjunctions and interjections as you can. Maybe I'll do a video on that soon. I should probably do that. The 10th thing that I did a lot of was use these books. So a dictionary of basic Japanese grammar and a dictionary of intermediate Japanese grammar, right here. I would go into these books and look for expressions that I thought seemed useful or that I was interested in, and I would learn them as best as I could, and then I'd make a bunch of sentences using them to see if I understood them, show them to my teacher in Italki, and she would correct them for me. Usually I made a lot of mistakes, but she would give me better sentences, and then I'd put them in Anki and study them over and over again. I also copied every single sentence, maybe not every single one. It might have been every single one, but at least one from each grammar section, and I made an Anki deck from them to practice grammar and to learn new vocabulary. And man, that was invaluable. Now, with that said, it means I also missed some earlier stuff because I wasn't using a textbook at the time. I didn't enjoy any of the textbooks I had tried up until that point. Mina no Nihongo I wasn't a big fan of. At the time, I wasn't a huge fan of Genki, but that means I missed some of the basics because I just went from the A section. Like I went in an alphabetical order through these books and just picked the ones I liked. But that meant I missed some important stuff. Later on, I ended up going back to a textbook. I went to Taikim and I went through a later second edition of Genki to get some of the basics knocked out. And I do recommend picking up a textbook or going through Taikim or something, like, or Genki. Genki is also, I think, pretty good in their structure and what they teach and the order they teach it in, to get those basics out of the way, and then jumping into something like the grammar dictionaries to get extra stuff. But yeah, I enjoyed that more than I expected. The explanations are really good. The sentences are good. They're good books. I recommend them. There's links in the description. They're affiliate links. Check them out if you want to. And number 11 is actually making sentences using everything that I learned. So I would make sentences from the grammar dictionaries. I'd make sentences using the new grammar I learned. I tried to make sentences that incorporated vocabulary for the new kanji I learned. I made sentences, tons of sentences, and I tried to use those sentences in conversation almost immediately. Because if I messed them up, or if they didn't make sense, I often found out immediately by the expression on the other person's face, or because they told me so, And man, making mistakes was such a great way to learn new things because embarrassment makes things stick for a long time. So usually if I mess up a word in Japanese, I don't mess it up again as long as I notice I messed it up. So there's that. So I created sentences, a lot of sentences. And that actually brings me to my 12th and final point is when you make flashcards, make them with sentences. Because something that I ran into in the beginning, which was really difficult, and that actually brings me to my first thing that I wish I didn't do, was using single word with just the meaning for flashcards. And the reason for that is I would learn a bunch of words and their English meaning, and I'd try to use them, and almost without fail, I used them in poor contexts. Like in places they didn't make sense, or in places that natives definitely would not use them. So as I realized that was becoming a problem, and half the words I was using, maybe more, just actually didn't work where I was using them, I realized that I needed to use sentences. So it's really important to look for sentences created by natives that are natural and that actually make sense with that word. Another great way to do this is using Kindle. I made a video about how you can copy Kindle vocabulary words along with their sentences directly into Anki. Because reading native material can give you the context for those words, and you can use the sentences from whatever you're reading. And while those might not be used in conversation regularly, it'll still be a proper usage for the word. People will definitely understand it, even if they wouldn't have said it that way. But if you just see a random word with the English meaning and you try and force it into a place where it doesn't belong, you're not going to get the meaning across that you wanted to. So yeah, I wish I didn't waste time with single word and single meaning vocabulary cards. I wish I went with sentences from the very beginning. The next thing that I would avoid is online language schools. Before I found italki or italki or whatever, I tried out a Japanese language school online, and it wasn't great. Something that I really wanted from my language teachers in italki is I wanted them to not use English. So I asked all my teachers to please not use English, and I did that at this language school, and the teachers got really annoyed at me for some reason because, well, obviously it's more work for them when they could just explain it in English. And I feel like some of the teachers actually wanted to teach Japanese online to practice their English. The other thing was that they had a very specific curriculum, and they weren't able to really handle the fact that I was studying a lot on my own and pushing past the stuff that they wanted to teach. They wanted to stick to their curriculum. In fact, they had to stick to their curriculum. So as I blew past what they were trying to teach me, it wasn't useful. It was more expensive than, individual teachers, and I don't know, it just wasn't great. And I've never really heard great things about many online language learning schools. So I strongly suggest using something like italki to find individuals who are teaching and people who are willing to follow you and follow along with your pace so that you can get the most bang for your buck. Finally, I already talked about this earlier, but it's the fact that I avoided textbooks. I should have spent a little bit more time on a grammar textbook, no matter what it was, whether it was Genki or Taikim or whatever. I should have spent a little bit more time in the beginning because I feel like I would have gotten the basics down a little bit better, and that would have made my life a little bit easier later on. Using these dictionaries alone in the beginning, it gave me some more advanced grammar than others who were only using textbooks, but I was also missing some very basics that I needed to go back, like retrace my steps for later. So pushing through some early grammar and grammar books in the beginning, I think that's a great idea. Obviously, I'm biased because I teach grammar from Genki, but bonus point. That brings me to one more bonus point, and that's learn how to describe things that you don't know the word for using other words. When you can describe things that you don't actually know how to say in Japanese, using other words in Japanese, you can literally have a conversation with anyone about anything. And in my opinion, when you're comfortable doing that, you can almost consider yourself fluent because you can actually get the word out of the other person and then continue on with your conversation. Maybe I'll make a video at some point about tips for that. But basically, yes, learning how to explain words you don't know with words you do know so that you can get your point across without actually using the correct vocabulary word is an extremely important skill to have when learning a language. It'll especially help you feel a little bit more comfortable so that you can talk to more natives and get more practice while you're studying Japanese. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you're not already subscribed. The bell is also awesome, and share this video with anyone you know who is studying Japanese and who you think it might be helpful for. Thanks for stopping by. We have a Patreon. There's a Patreon down there. We have lots of lessons, bonus material for the Genki live streams that I've been doing over time. Come hang out in one of those live streams. Maybe we'll see you there. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Build some habits around studying Japanese and, in my opinion, start speaking as soon as you can. Have a great day.